Psalm 31 from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. In you, O Lord, I seek refuge. Do not let me ever be put to shame. In your righteousness deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. You are indeed my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out of the net that is hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. You hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will exult and rejoice in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have taken heed of my adversities and have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye wastes away from grief, my soul and my body also, for my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my misery, and my bones waste away. I am the scorn of all my adversaries, a horror to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I have passed out of the mind like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel. For I hear the whispering of many, terror all around, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies and persecutors. Let your face shine upon your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. Do not let me be put to shame, O Lord, for I call on you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them go dumbfounded to Sheol. Let the lying lips be stilled to speak insolently, that speak insolently against the righteous with pride and contempt. Oh, how abundant is your goodness that you have laid up for those who fear you and accomplished for those who take refuge in you in the sight of everyone. In the shelter of your presence, you hide them from human plots. You hold them safe under your shelter from contentious tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was beset as a city under siege. I had said in my alarm, I am driven far from your sight, but you heard my supplications when I cried out to you for help. Love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts haughtily. Be strong, and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord.
Good morning. As I said in my welcome, I'm sitting outside in my backyard today because we are dealing with a particularly hard topic of dealing with the struggling times in our lives. And nature is something that brings me renewal and refreshment, and so I thought that maybe it would bring some of you comfort today as we work through this hard topic. So we are continuing to work our way through our Blessed to Me summer worship series. We've been looking at different blessings in our lives, from the mundane to special rites of passage. And today we have a more difficult type of blessing to look at. Too often we consider blessing to be just those things that feel good to us. And yet, the Celtic tradition extends blessings to ties of loss. What blessing might we find in those circumstances, not in spite of those circumstances, but because of them? Blessings does not deny sorrow, but deepens and moves us through it. So we are using Psalm 31 today to help us talk about illness, loss, grief, isolation, depression, and how we might be able to see what blessing we might find from these circumstances. The opening verses of Psalm 39 shine light onto the psalmist's suffering, but at the same time place emphasis on the writer's assurance that God will deliver them. This psalm is about the afflicted and the trouble and suffering of the afflicted. In verse 9 of this chapter, a powerful lament begins. We see the physical and emotional suffering that the psalmist is expressing. And the psalmist is begging God, "For I am in distress." As Elizabeth Webb laid out in a commentary on this scripture, quote, "The exact nature of this distress is not identified, but its dimensions are clear and familiar to all of us. Pain of some sort has engulfed the sufferer, some affliction that has filled the speaker's life with sorrow and my years with sighing." Images of physical and psychological pain intermingle, as is so often the case when we experience deep distress. The psalmist's eye and soul and body waste away from grief. The psalmist's strength fails and bones waste away. Acute suffering can consume us utterly, whatever its cause. Affliction is felt as deeply in our souls as in our bones. It's the social humiliation, the scorn and rejection of others which inflicts the deepest wounds upon the afflicted. End quote. Our psalmist is lamenting a deep grief in this chapter, in chapter 31. We see isolation in this chapter. The psalmist speaks of being a horror to their neighbors and an object of dread to their acquaintances. Even those that one can expect to depend on in times of trouble have abandoned the afflicted person. In verse 12 it reads, "I have passed out of mind like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel." This shows to us just how very useless, worthless, unwanted the psalmist feels. It seems that the psalmist's life is broken and no one has any use for the pieces. The psalmist is experiencing deep isolation and fear and rejection. And this deep physical and emotional suffering has caused the writer to feel a very threat to their own lives. However, the psalmist continues to pronounce their trust in the Lord. In fact, our writer sees God as the only one on whom the afflicted can depend. As Elizabeth Webb wrote, the isolation and violence that affliction has wrought are contrasted by the hands-on imagery of God's presence with the sufferer. In verse 15 of this chapter we read, "My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies and persecutors." The psalmist is calling on God to let God's face shine upon your servant. This is a familiar refrain that we recently looked at from Numbers chapter 6:25. "The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you." But this is not only a call for God to show God's favor to the sufferer, it is also a cry for the very presence of God with the sufferer. Psalm 31 shows to us the suffering of the afflicted and the steadfast faith the psalmist had that God was with them. Psalm 31 can be all too close to home for a lot of us at various times in our life. Psalm 31 is a reminder that we are not alone in our suffering. The title of my sermon today is The Struggling Times, Facing Illness, Loss, and Grief. This title is a bit chilling as it's so very real in our lives right now. As a community, society, country, and world, as individuals, we are all facing illness, loss, and grief as we live through this pandemic. The emotional trauma that we are all experiencing because of this is very, very real. We have lost 800,000 people worldwide to this pandemic, and even just having to say that number breaks my heart. Together, we are experiencing this illness, this loss, and this grief. But individually, and on top of this, you, are facing illness, loss, and grief. You may have battled with COVID-19 personally, or have had a loved one that did. You may have watched a loved one lose the battle. You have lost loved ones unrelated to this pandemic. And now you are working through that loss and grief on top of dealing with the loss and grief and trauma of this pandemic. It's a lot, friends. We are all struggling in our own ways, and I can't think of a better scripture to pair with what we are dealing with than Psalm 31. Listen to Psalm 31, verse 5. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. According to Luke chapter 23, verse 46, these are Jesus' last words on the cross. Hear them now from Luke 23:46. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. This whole psalm resonates so loudly with the passion of the Christ. And what this says to us from the psalm is that Jesus knows our deepest afflictions, because Jesus took on those afflictions himself into God's self. We have a God that loves us so much that this God came into the world naked and vulnerable as a newborn, just as we did. We have a God that loves us so much that this God traveled through the ups and downs of puberty just as we did or are currently doing. We have a God that loves us so much that this God journeyed through the stress and pain and laughter of adulthood just as we did or currently are doing. We have a God that loves us so much that this God felt pain and suffering and violence and harassment. This God felt the very things that you might be struggling with right now. This God died, just like we will. But the story doesn't end there. This God, our God, rose after 3 days. Our God rose to remind us that this pain and suffering and violence and death, it's not the end. The pain you are feeling right now isn't the end of the story. No, because Jesus rose to remind you, to remind us that you are not alone. Jesus rose to be the light in the darkness, hope for the hopeless. Our story, friends, doesn't end in pain and suffering and death, because we have faith in a God that has overcome those things for us. Now, I get that this good news doesn't make things all better now. And I get that this good news may give you hope, but it doesn't fix what's going on in your life. I get that. But just maybe being reminded of God's love and presence in your life can be what you needed to hear today. Maybe this good news will give you that motivation you needed to reach out to that friend. Maybe this good news will give you the courage to reach out to someone to tell them you are struggling. Maybe this good news is just the thing that gets you off the couch today. Friends, if you are struggling with illness, grief, depression, anxiety, isolation, substance abuse, suicidal thoughts, reach out. Reach out to someone, anyone. You can reach out to me. My email is angiek@avumc.org. You can also reach out to me to tell me your prayer requests, and I can also pass those on to our prayer chain team. Reach out to a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, or a spiritual director. Find one that works for you and begin talking about what's going on in your life. If you or a family member is facing mental and/or substance use disorders, you can call the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services National Helpline at 1-800-662-4357. If you are struggling with depression and having suicidal thoughts, or someone you know is, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. Life is hard right now for many, and for various reasons. If you need light, make sure to tell someone the darkness that you are experiencing, or see how you might be of light in those dark places, or perhaps try to find light in your own life. As your pastor, I am here for you. Please reach out to me. And as your pastor, I'm called to be vulnerable with you, to remind you that it's okay, whatever you are dealing with. Throughout my life, I have struggled with times of depression. This week was a really, really hard week. The isolation of this pandemic, the fear and loneliness, the pain of not being able to meet you all in person and to worship together and get to know you, the reality of loss and people I know and love getting ill or hospitalized. It all caught up with me this week. But because I have struggled with this, I knew I needed to talk about it. I told Colleen, my wife, that I could feel I was slipping into depression, and together we worked through some ideas that would help me not feel so isolated. I talked with my friend Zach about it. I cried with my sister about it. And I will talk with my therapist about it with her on Monday. It's okay. Whatever you are struggling with, know that you're not alone. Reach out to someone. I promise it helps. And then continue to get the professional help that you need. Currently, one of my favorite Christian contemporary songs is called Even Then by Micah Tyler, and his lyrics fit perfectly. On the night when the dark lasts a little bit longer, when the wind and the storm is a little bit stronger, when the fear in my heart dips a little bit deeper, when my faith to stand gets a little bit weaker, where could I run to? Where could I go? Even when it feels like my world is shaken, even when I've had all that I can take, I know you never let me go. And even when the waters won't stop rising, even when I'm caught in the dead of a night, I know no matter how it ends, you're with me even then. Friends, God is with us even when we think God might not be. William Barclay translates our New Testament reading from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 8 through 9 in this way. We are sore pressed at every point, but not hemmed in. We are at our wits' end, but never at our hope's end. We are persecuted by men, but never abandoned by God. We are knocked down, but not knocked out. You are not alone. You are not alone, friends. Let us be God's people, creating beloved community through the work of creating beautiful relationships that break all boundaries and help to spread more of God's light into the dark places of our world, knowing and realizing that we are more alike than we care to admit sometimes. And the truth is that when we are weary and need rest or don't know where to turn to, God is by our side. It will take trust. Trust in your relationship with God. Trust that God is your strength and comfort, your steady hand, your firm foundation, the rock on which you stand. Knowing that there is not a place where we go that God has not already stood. Listen to that one more time. Knowing that there is not a place where we go that God has not already stood. God is waiting for you. Waiting for you to open up to God's unconditional love. Waiting for you to begin or strengthen your relationship with God. Waiting for you to help shine light in the dark places of our world. Together with God, we can be a light amidst the dark forces, because just as illness and suffering and depression and addiction know no boundaries, God's love also knows no boundaries. Amen.